So let us begin with discussing some of the basic features of the intelligence test. Initially, when intelligence tests were developed during World War, they were simple tests, but later on you all know that Binet-Simon Commission was appointed to assess the intellectual deficiency deficit among school-going children, and they developed the first test battery that is called Binet-Simon scale of intelligence. And later on, Wessler developed another intelligence test, Wessler Valley intelligence test, and he was not satisfied with the uh, Stanford Binet scale, and therefore he developed that scale. But before going to that history, the different tests that were earlier developed and today present can be classified into two categories. Either they follow a point scale format or a age scale format. When Binet-Simon scale was developed, it was earlier in age scale format. So if any individual is passing one item, the items were basically organized according to age. For 2 years old children, say for 4 years, for 5 years, for 6 years. And there is a methodology for that. They administer the test to a specific age group for which it was intended, then to a higher age group and to a lower age group. If say 75% there was a cutoff, individuals pass all the items of a given age score, but very and none of the items is failed by lower age group, and all the items are passed by higher age group, then those items will be considered specific to that age. So Stanford Binet has having history of age scale, but point scale intelligence test assigns some scores 1, 2, 3, 4 points for each of the items. They do not score in terms of age. So in Binet Simon scale, if you will go to the older forms, each item is having credit in months, years and months like that, and ultimately the test administering individual will arrive at a mental age, and then the same formula was used, mental age by chronological age into 100 is equal to IQ. But point scale is different from age scale. If you qualify any item, then you get some points, and there are different scoring criteria. The advantage of point scale is that we can club items which are similar in terms of measuring some cognitive function. Say we can cluster all items which are measuring working memory. We can cluster all items which are measuring, say, visual reasoning. We can cluster all items which are measuring, say, verbal reasoning, quantitative reasoning, like that. But the limitation of age scale was that items are not clustered as per the cognitive functions. They are clustered according to the age. So for a higher age group, we cannot move the lower age group item to get at a scale of any particular cognitive function. Another distinction is verbal scale versus performance scale. And you all know that in performance scale, largely non-verbal materials are used and participants are asked to perform something like drawing something, or say developing a design using some blocks, completing some puzzles, pictorial puzzles. Suppose an animal uh, is the whole picture of animal is cut into different pieces and scattered, and you are then asked to combine to make the whole animal. So you perform something, and that requires minimum verbal ability or no verbal ability. On the other hand, there are verbal skills which rely on verbal questions. And the last point that you are seeing, I have already differentiated that before Stanford Binet 4th edition, the Stanford Binet scales were in A's, whereas Wessler intelligence scale is right from the beginning in point scale format, and therefore it was having some advantage over the older Stanford Binet scale. Now, coming to the history, the Wessler, working in Bellevue Hospital, developed the first intelligence test named Wessler-Bellevue scale, and sometimes we refer Wessler-Bellevue 1 also because it got revision, you can see here, in 1946 Wessler-Bellevue. But this revision was the foundation stone for the children version and preschool primary version of the intelligence scale. So the adult intelligence scale is based on Wessler-Bellevue scale, and then in 1955 this scale was renamed as Wessler Adult Intelligence Scale. Then its revision took place in 1981, and in 1997 third edition was developed, and from 2008 onwards, WAIS IV is available for assessing adult intelligence scale. And as you will note further, that WAIS IV is a major revision compared to all its earlier version, and one important revision is revision in its theoretical base, theoretical foundation. Earlier, as I said, Wessler defined intelligence as the global capacity to think rationally, act purposefully, and deal effectively. That definition was dominant in the conceptualization of intelligence and development of test. But WAS 4 is based on an updated theory that I will discuss later. Similarly, the other teacher who will be teaching these two skills, you will learn that Wessler Value 2 was developed, and the range was from 10 to 79 years. And based on this, Wessler Intelligence Scale for Children was developed in 1949, and then it got different revisions. WISC R in 74, WISC 3 in 91, and WISC 4 in 2003. And from this WISC, the Wessler pre and primary scale of intelligence was developed for preschool children in 1967, and WPPSI 3 is the recent version available that was developed in 2002, and the age range is 2.6 years to 7.3 years. So this is the brief history of intelligence test. Now, as I said, that WAIS 4 is based on an updated theory. The theoretical foundation of WAIS is basically a theory of intelligence called CHC, Cattle Horn Carroll theory, and basically there are two theories. The Horn and Kettle's theory, you might have learnt it in your earlier classes, which differentiated between two types of intelligence, fluid intelligence and crystallized intelligence. Fluid intelligence is the inborn mental ability which is less influenced by schooling, environment, or the other things, whereas crystallized intelligence is influenced by schooling, sociocultural environment, and many other factors. And in 1993, Carroll independently developed a theory that is called three-stratum theory of intelligence. So they conceptualized G, the Spearman's G, general mental ability at the top, and then at the second stratum, at second level, they conceptualized train broad cognitive abilities like fluid reasoning, they called it general mental ability fluid GF, comprehension knowledge GC, short term memory GSM, visual processing GV, auditory processing, long term retrieval, etc. And at third level, there were more than 100 narrow abilities. And you can find the very good review in McGrew 2009. So, based on the similarity, as you can see that the Carroll 3 Stratum theory also recognizes the fluid intelligence as well as crystallized intelligence. For example, comprehension and knowledge, this will be part of crystallized intelligence. So, based on this, in 1985, in that meeting, the authors of these two scales or these two theory were also present, and uh, the meeting was for some different purpose, not for developing this theory, and there an agreement occurred that yes, these two theories can be amalgamated together, and that formed the base of a combined theory in which the Horn and Kettle's theory of fluid and crystallized intelligence was combined with Carroll's three stratum theory. So the WAIS 4 reflects this three stratum, and just to have contrast, see the WAIS III structure. That was basically a four-tier hierarchy, and as you can see, this is vocabulary, arithmetic, picture completion, coding. These are subtests. So this is the lowest level in the hierarchy. Then above this is verbal comprehension index, working memory index, perceptual organization index, processing speed index, and these are two tests which are required in computation of verbal IQ and performance IQ. So the third in the level of hierarchy is verbal IQ and performance IQ, and the fourth level is full scale IQ. So this was the four-tier hierarchy in WAIS 3 because it was not based on three stratum theory or CSC theory. But now see, the WAIS 4 or WAIS 4 is having a three stratum structural organization. At the bottom, you can see the narrow abilities like similarities, vocabulary, information, comprehension. These are individual subtests measuring some narrow cognitive abilities, and these combined together forms a broader mental ability called verbal comprehension. Similarly, block design, matrix reasoning, visual puzzles, when these three are combined, they form perceptual reasoning. And these are some optional. The tests written in parentheses are optional subtests. So these are the narrow abilities as I defined the Carroll's theory. These are the broader cognitive abilities measured by WAIS 4, and at the top is full scale IQ, which is like Z, the general mental ability. So this is the organizational difference. And three theoretical constructs needs a definition. So one is fluid reasoning, and this is the ability to process or manipulate abstractions. So abstract concepts processing and manipulation is included in fluid reasoning. Ability to process or manipulate abstractions, rules, generalization, and logical relationship. This is the formal operational definition of fluid reasoning in this theory. On the other hand, working memory has been defined as ability to actively maintain information in one's awareness, consciousness, to hold it for some time, and then perform some operations and manipulation, for example reversing the numbers in sequence, adding some numbers. So uh, performing some operations and manipulation with it and produce a result. This is the definition of working memory. Processing speed is defined as ability to process information quickly, rapidly. And this processing speed is considered one of the important indicator of intelligence. As I referred in one of the earlier class, intelligence known and unknown, the American psychologist journal article, which was basically a report of the committee, there they define that the latest development in defining intelligence is that intelligence is reflected in an individual's ability to process information rapidly and quickly compared to those who are having low IQ. And this is found to be related with performance on higher order tasks also. So from this, I will start defining the structure of the WAIS, and at the same time when I will be defining and describing the subtest, I will also discuss its clinical utility. And you all will recall that I emphatically mentioned that some qualitative analysis of response is also required apart from scoring and scatter in deriving some clinically useful information. So, for each test, if an individual is showing strength or weakness on any subtest compared to some reference point, some pre-morbid IQ estimate, then that has a clinical implications. But for making this clinical judgment, we must know what each subtest measures, the cognitive functions measured by them, and to have valid inference, we must know what are the factors that can influence the scores, because the factors that can influence the score will not always be clinical factors. Some non-clinical factors can also influence the scores. So if non-clinical factors are present, then we will have to be very cautious in interpreting the subtest scatter. And when we look at the subtest, it can be looked in three ways: empirically, cognitively, and clinically. In this lecture, I will focus on how we look at these subtests clinically. So, this is the framework under which I will describe the clinical utility of the test. Now, this is again the test structure, and you can see that the test has been categorized in four indices: the verbal comprehension scale, perceptual reasoning scale. Earlier WAIS 3 used the term index, but in this scale term is used working memory scale and processing speed scales. And there are some core subtests in each and supplemental subtests. Remember that supplemental subtest is used when some of the core test is invalidated or spoiled. Invalidation and spoiling of test may occur because of different reasons. For example, during performance, the patient or the client became ill or developed some problem and could not complete. Similarly, uh, some may show negation and they did a few items and then they rejected to do the task. In such situation, we try to substitute the missing test by the supplemental test. So this is the structure, and to make it easier, I will again present it in a three stratum form. And here you can see that the dotted darks are the optional subtest. So the verbal comprehension scale, I have used index, uh, is based on these three tests: similarities, vocabulary, and information. So this is again the repetition. I will not stay long here. Let us define, let us try to understand that this higher mental ability is represented in terms of four scales represent what? Verbal comprehension index is considered to reflect the individual's ability to comprehend the verbal stimuli, reason with semantic material, the materials that those are having some meaning, semantics, and communicates one thoughts and ideas with words. So such abilities are combined together in one cognitive ability that is called verbal comprehension. Similarly, perceptual reasoning index reflects an individual's ability to accurately interpret, organize, and think with visual information. It also measures the non-verbal reasoning skills and taps into thinking that is more fluid and requires visual perceptual abilities. So, perceptual reasoning index is basically an index of fluid intelligence which is less influenced by schooling, socio-cultural environment, etc. Similarly, working memory reflects an individual's ability, as you can recall from the definition, that to take in, so receive some information, hold that information in one's immediate awareness, and then perform some mental operation like addition, subtraction, rearranging them. It also measures the mental manipulation of number operation, as I said, multiplication, division, addition, subtraction. Processing speed similarly reflects an individual's ability to process simple or routine visual information, but quickly and efficiently. So here the items are not very tough, but that requires quick and rapid information processing, and at the same time without compromising with the accuracy. Basically, it measures the visual motor coordination and visual motor speed. So we can interpret the WAIS scores in terms of these four indices also, as well as in terms of subtest. Today and onwards, I will be focusing on subtest. There is another way to look on the higher order cognitive abilities based on factor analytic results. So as you can see here, there are four indices only, but factor structure or factor analysis revealed five domains, and these are the core five factor model based on 10 core subtests. So vocabulary plus information in the core subtest will measure crystallized intelligence, and this is same, and this is called Keith five factor model, which includes two, in italics you can see, supplemental test. So for this factor analysis you will need two supplemental tests. So this five factor model is more helpful when some test is spoiled and the supplemental test is used. In that condition we cannot go for this. So digit span and letter number sequencing, it represents short term memory. Fluid reasoning, similarly, matrix reasoning figure weights in Keith model and matrix reasoning arithmetic in the original model, visual processing and processing speed. So we can go with four indices or we can go with five factor model while interpreting the WAIS 4 scores clinically. But today my focus is on the structure of the WAIS 4, description of each of the subtests and their clinical utility. So subtest by subtest clinical utility. And while discussing this, I will present the subtest in different scales. So the verbal comprehension index or verbal comprehension scale, as you are aware now, it consists four subtests, three core. They are similarities, vocabulary, and information. So we will need to administer only these core tests. And comprehension will be administered only and only when some of the test is spoiled or invalidated because of one reason or the other. Now let us begin uh, with description of each test. In similarities, the participant or the examinee is required to describe how two objects or two concepts are similar, alike in nature. And this subtest measures the verbal concept formation ability, abstract verbal reasoning ability, categorical thinking, and the ability to distinguish between essential features from non-essential features. This is one example from WAIS 4. In what ways are a fork and a spoon alike? If someone says that it is eating utensil or eating tool, it will be considered correct response and 2 points will be given. Utensil, cutlery, again 2 points will be given. Things you use to eat, deliver food to mouth, such response will get 2 points. But have handless, so means eating without use of hand, if you are saying this, or this is something which is handheld, or you put or place them on table, then you are having some abstract essential feature of that, but not the perfect essential features, and therefore 1 point is given. But suppose one is saying that both are long, spoon and fork, they are long utensils or devices, it means they are not understanding the abstract similarities. Made up of plastic, metal, silver, in other sense, it is correct. If both are made of, say, steel, it is correct. But for this purpose, the similarities must be based on some abstract concept. What is the abstract concept underlying the two objects or two concepts that make them similar? So this thing is measured by similarities. Now coming to its clinical implications, as I mentioned earlier, just I am going back to show you this, that what each subtest measure, what are the factors that it is being influenced, and then its clinical utility. So I am presenting this in the same way. So this test measure these things. These are the factors. So if you are flexible in your thinking, if you are adopting a flexible problem solving approach, it means you can shift from one mental set to the other mental set, then your scores will be positively influenced. You will score higher. On the other hand, if you are responding with negativism, you say they are not alike. So sometimes then this type of response may come in pathological cases, or if overly concrete thinking is there, then one will say that both are long, both are made of from some plastic, steel like that. So overly concrete thinking will also be one influencing factor, and how much you are having outside reading. If you are well-read person, then you can score better. So these factors should be considered while interpreting any elevation or depression in the score, any increase or decrease in the score, any scatter in the score. Now, coming to the clinical consideration, first we should evaluate the degree of abstractness of the response. The response may be abstract, like table and chair are furniture. It may be concrete, like coat and suit are made of cloth. Or it may be based on some functions, like north and west tell you where you are going. So rather than defining the abstract feature, one is defining it based on the functions. So over elaboration, if it is found in similarities, overly general response or overly inclusive response, you are presenting a very comprehensive inclusive definition. Or if you are making self-reference, you are referring yourself in defining that, then that should be noted for clinical significance. For example, over-elaboration may suggest obsessiveness. Overly inclusive response may suggest a thought disorder. Similarly, self-reference are unusual during similarities and may be indicative of personal preoccupation, and even in psychotic conditions such personal references may occur. Similarly, brain damaged patients have difficulty giving abstract conceptual response. So they are likely to score less. And particularly since this is a verbal concept formation measure, as you will recall from the previous slide, it is very sensitive to left hemisphere lesion, left hemisphere damage, and particularly in left temporal and frontal lobes, but not in right frontal lobe. So if you are having lesions, then score is likely to be lowered on similarities. But remember that all these interpretations should be based on a lot many things. First, we will have to overrule that whether it is because of poor outside reading, poor socioeconomic status, etc., or not. And after ruling out these non clinical influential factors, we should also do some subsequent evaluation to substantiate our hypothesis. So, this will provide some clue, but it is not the confirm. Any question till now? So, the second test is vocabulary. This is primarily composed of verbal items, so words are there and one has to define words. But for lower, the Wessler Adult Intelligence Scale is uh, capable of measuring IQ from 16 years to 90 years 11 months. So some picture items are also included to extend the floor. Floor means the lower score. If some individuals are having very low ability, say mentally challenged individuals, their ability can also be assessed. Therefore, some picture items have been included. For picture items, the examinee or testee is required to name the picture. The picture is shown and called asked, "What is this?" and they just name the picture. But for verbal items, the individual has to define the words that are presented visually as well as read aloud by the examiner. So, this is the instruction. You will say that I am going to say some words. Listen carefully and tell me what each word means. And then here it is written, point to the word apple. So in the booklet you will point your finger apple and you will say apple aloud, and then the subject will try to define. If he is saying fruit, type or kind of fruit, then it suggests that he is having some understanding of the word apple, and 2 points are given. This is not the exhaustive list of response. 1 point for such response, that food, something you eat it. So at least they know that apple is edible. So some score is given, 1 point is given. Healthy, nutritious food, again 1 point is given. But if an individual is saying goes in your mouth, it tastes nice, sweet, or you say what is apple? Apple. You give it to your teacher, you gift it to your friend, like this, it means you are not having the meaning of the term apple. Therefore, you get 0 point. And this subtest measure again the verbal concept formation, linguistic or language development, and word knowledge. And it requires long term memory. If long term memory is impaired, then vocabulary performance is likely to be influenced. And these are some of the factors that can influence the performance on vocabulary subtest. cultural opportunities at home. So if one individual is living in rich environment where he is or she is having lot of things to play, see TV is there, mobile is there. So these cultural opportunities will naturally enhance the vocabulary, and one is having restricted cultural opportunities, then vocabulary will be lower. Similarly, this is I have not seen any Hindi adaptation of this at least. So it is all the words are English words. So if one is not having foreign language, English language experience, then naturally we are not English person. Our vocabulary is likely to be influenced. We are likely to get lower score not because we are poor in vocabulary, but because we are having a poor ability in the foreign tongue, that is English. Similarly, intellectual curiosity and striving, outside reading, richness of early environment, school learning, these are the factors that can influence. So when interpreting the scores, we should rule out this, and then if it is not because of difference in school learning, it is not because of this, then it is likely that it may be because of clinical factors. So in general, one important consideration is repression. Repression often lead to poor performance. How? By pushing out of consciousness any word meanings that are even mildly conflict laden. So if there is any hidden unconscious subconscious conflict with the word, then individual may show repression, and that repression will result in such responses which will get a score of 1 or 0. Similarly, repression may also impair the acquisition of new word meanings as well as recall of specific words on the vocabulary subtest. So dominance of repression or repressive personality may be one factor reflecting poor test score on this. Similarly, if one is having very high score compared with other verbal subtests, then this reflects the high press for achievement, the high need for achievement. Apart from this, some qualitative analysis is also required. We can see the content. Though the individual failed, he is having 0 score, but we can look on the content of the definitions, the response given, whether some indications of fears, guilt, preoccupations, some feelings, some interest, perseveration, or clang associations means rhyming similar associations like moral, floral, perception, reception. Whether such responses are present or not, they may indicate or provide some clue towards presence of certain types of psychopathology. And perseveration is generally giving same definition again and again, then that is very clear indication of perseveration. But perseveration sometimes may occur in terms of using same phraseology again and again in defining the words. I have given one example, confide. That's hard one to define. So whenever I ask anything, "Oh, what is a guitar?" Then you say confide. That's hard to one to define. Then you are showing some signs of perseveration. And you all know that perseveration is not normal. It is something abnormal. Now, the third core test of this verbal comprehension scale is information. Information items generally ask questions that requires or that addresses a broad range of general knowledge. It may include factual knowledge also. For example, in Indian context, I will give example how many members are there in the parliament. So it may include factual knowledge also, and it tests the degree of general information that we as an individual acquire from being part of our society and culture. This is one example item. What is the shape of most balls? So if one is saying round, sphere, circle, etc., then he is having or she is having some 1 point is given. And if he defines shape of a specific ball, cricket ball, say football, then we give 0 point because we are asking the abstract feature. What is the shape of the most balls? Or if we say some other shape other than say ellipse or other shape, then it will get zero score. Similarly, another item is what is a thermometer used for? So if one is saying instrument or tool to measure temperature, then correct answer 1 point. To determine freezing boiling point, again correct answer 1 point. There are other answers that can be correct, and 0 points when you are ill or sick, means you are not having the exact meaning, exact knowledge of the thermometer. Measures atmospheric pressure, water level. This shows again that you are not having the knowledge what thermometer is. So these are some examples of the items related to information. Remember that it will is like general knowledge test that will ask simple general information that one is supposed to acquire being member of the society. You don't need any learning. Those who are not going to school, they also know what is thermometer. It measures fluid knowledge or fluid comprehension, fluid intelligence, long-term memory and retrieval, verbal comprehension, and crystallized intelligence as well, because it will be influenced by schooling and other factors. So factors that influence information is alertness to the environment. Those who are alert to the environment will acquire the needed general information and knowledge, cultural opportunities at home, foreign language background. Again, it will influence. If you are not good in English, then you may be performing poor. Intellectual curiosity and striving, that will influence positively. Outside reading, it will influence the score positively. Richness of early environment, again it will influence the score positively. School learning, again it will influence the score positively. So these are the factors that can influence the test performance. Coming to the clinical considerations, generally, adolescents with chronic anxiety may show early failure. So they attempt one, two items and then they fail the items. And in general, they show lower scores on this test. Similarly, if there is some difficulty because of some brain related cognitive disorder, then retrieval difficulties may also be revealed on this test. For example, in Alzheimer's patient, there is a difficulty in retrieving information. And this is inferred when one is having success on harder items but fails on easy items. So inter item scatter that I taught in the last class, if one is failing easy items and passing harder items, it may be one indicator, not the confirmed indicator of retrieval difficulty. Similarly, if one is providing unnecessary detail or trivial responses are given, then this may suggest obsessiveness. And doing the content analysis, qualitative analysis of the response, if the response contents are bizarre or odd responses, they can throw some light on individuals' mental state. For example, a response such as there are 1000 weeks in a year, or Gandhi is the guy I saw at the supermarket, may indicate a need to explore mental functioning further. So, the qualitative responses, what I am emphasizing with these examples is that it is not only the subtest scatter, but the response time, the reactions, the nature and content of the response, all things should be taken into consideration when we are using intelligence test as a clinical tool. Now coming to the last, and the class will also end from this slide, the comprehension supplemental subtest. This is administered only and only when the test is invalidated, the core test is invalidated, or the subtest performance is spoiled by some or other regions. It is very similar to information but different in the sense that it requires the questions in the comprehension sections requires the understanding of the basic principles and rules of the society and the understanding of the social situations rather than factual knowledge which is more emphasized in information. This basically tests the ability to deal with abstract social conventions, rules, and uh, expressions and general social awareness. And generally, three types of questions are there. If you will see the questions carefully, then they are classified in three categories. What should be done in a given situation? For example, what should you do if you find an injured person lying? Second is to provide a logical explanation for a rule or phenomena. Why do we bury the dead person? And to define a proverb, a stitch in time saves nine. So these three types of items are generally present in comprehension, and this subtest also measures the verbal conceptualization, the verbal expression, practical knowledge that is different from all other tests because all tests are basically the subtest of a single second order verbal comprehension skill. So all will be measuring verbal conceptualization, but this practical knowledge is additional, social judgment, crystallized intelligence, and common sense. This slide will show, just read it. There are some real items from the WAIS 4. Why do people wash clothes? And these are the answers. If given, 2 points will
So,
be given. Yes,
so we have a class now.
yes, I am ending the class. So these are the items of the real test and the factors that influence the comprehension is cultural opportunities at home, development of conscience and moral sense because you are dealing with social information, flexibility, again negativism will negatively influence, and overly concrete thinking will indication of pathology. And clinically, a stable and emotionally balanced attitude and orientation is necessary for success on this test. So, if you are not scoring well, then this may an indication of emotional instability. Similarly, any type of maladjustment may lower a score. However, high score on comprehension alone is not enough to interpret otherwise that one is socially adjusted. Low score may show poor social maladjustment. Similarly, the content of responses also offer clues about the mental disturbances of the individuals, social adaptive functioning, social situations, and like response to similarities and vocabulary, response to comprehension may vary in their degree of abstractness. That should also be considered. And this ability to reason may be especially evident in the examination of the proverbs. Ability to think in abstract terms. Swallow means don't generalize from a single instance. Is distinct from more concrete type of this is shallow from more concrete response. Brooks means if brook is too shallow and you throw a rock, it makes noise. So thank you very much. And from next, I will start the other